As for my background and personal reflection on crime writing as a genre, my first introduction to it was by reading In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, which is extremely popular. I read it when I was in the 11th grade, and that was my first introduction to crime writing. Of course, I had watched some like true crime shows and videos on YouTube, but I had never actually read any literature about it. Um, but In Cold Blood really took the true crime genre by storm, and I think that he did a really good job at making sure not to romanticize or glorify the murders that were talked about in the book. So I believe that the most important aspect of crime writing for the author and for the perception of the reader is to um, not undermine the graveness or serious nature of the crime, depending on what it is, obviously, just to make sure it's not viewed in a idealized or romanticized way. I believe that writing, crime writing specifically, is inextricably connected to suspense and mystery. It has to include some elements of that to maintain, the kind of atmosphere that crime writing really uses to separate itself from other genres. It needs at least a couple of elements of suspense and mystery. Um, and I believe that it has to contain some realistic elements, not all, obviously, because it is very easy to get, the realism part of crime writing wrong. Um, like Chandler says, he says realism takes too much talent, too much knowledge, too much awareness, and it is easy to abuse. Um, and I absolutely agree with that. Obviously, it's really, really hard to write about a crime and maintain, complete realism about it. It can be easily messed up. So it's important not to achieve like absolute perfection when it comes to the realistic elements. But when I read Neiman's argument on the politics of crime in particular, I really enjoy what he said about crime fiction and reality. He talked about those two things in the very beginning of his argument. But I really enjoy what he said in the quote: "A typical work of crime fiction, be it detective, police procedural, espionage, or even noir, begins with the disruption of a seemingly stable reality." And I think that was a really good, succinct way for him to put it. And I would say that's basically what crime writing is, just in a sentence. And I think that also goes back to, what I said about realism in crime writing, is that it has to include some kind of disruption of that reality. When it comes to the author's political beliefs coming into play into their writing and their background, I personally believe that for me, I really enjoy reading biographical information about the author and about the book, just for added context and additional understanding. But I also believe that I would be able to tell what those views might be through the writing. But it definitely makes sense to me that crime writing is political. In a sense, that is the foundation of crime writing. It is definitely political. It's based on law, the criminal justice system, morals, and even the public, especially when the crime is viewed under the public eye and becomes extremely popular and talked about. But I personally have not read a ton of crime fiction. Um, I'd say that the only like crime book that I have read would be In Cold Blood. I've also read books like Gone Girl, but I'm not sure if that would necessarily be crime fiction. It might be more of a mystery or a suspense, which is where that line is kind of blurred. Um, but I can't really put my finger on any kind of crime writing that might be subordinate or I might view as more of a guilty pleasure than anything. But I would say if there's any kind of um, let's say fiction that focuses on murder that like completely romanticizes it, then that obviously would steer me away because that would be problematic. But going back to what I said before about approaching crime writing or true crime, all that, whatever encompasses crime writing, um, it should never be romanticized or idealized in an imaginative, super fabricated way. And it can't be obsessive, especially for the reader. I know it can be obsessive for some, especially if the writing is based on a factual case. So it's best to approach it with open mindedness and empathy and sensitivity.